Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Japanese Politics 101 room. Every Sunday, Timothy Langley, who runs a company in Tokyo that focuses exclusively on Japanese politics, government and public affairs, and host Pai Matsuoka, bring to you the latest developments in Japanese politics. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions and opinions, so if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region.
This week, we're still talking about what's going on politically with Mr. Kishida and the factional dynamics. There's a lot of action going on there. The diet started last week, so they started their 150-day session. And currently, that means that they are they're in budget meetings in the budget room. So when you watch what's going on television, it is typically the prime minister and the full cabinet. Not everybody shows up if the questions aren't related to their particular area of responsibility. But the prime minister is almost always seated there. And this will go on until mid-February. So it's a tense time, and it gives the opportunity for the opposition to ask very direct questions. And since it's televised live, the entire Japanese population can watch this going on and observe the continence of the speakers, and judge for themselves how accurate and how committed they are in the explanations that they're giving. So it's a good time, especially for a room like ours, to dissect that, to report on that, because it does dictate what is happening now, what's happened in the past, the explanations for it, and what we can anticipate in the future. So today what I'd like to talk about is what's going on in Japanese economy and politics and diplomacy that are actually going to be demonstrable in the next coming maybe 6 or 8 months. So the reason why I cap it at 6 or 8 months is because we have a upper house election in July, and much of what is being discussed, and maybe not so much what is being discussed, but the motivations for decisions that are being made for what is being discussed, is dictated by the upper house elections. This is a big deal. The LDP and the Komeito coalition, they want to do extremely well there. They want to capture a 2/3 majority, and then they want to move pretty briskly on a revision of the Constitution. That is, even in spite of the fact that Mr. Abe is no longer prime minister, it is still one of the precepts of the Liberal Democratic Party to revise the Constitution, to take acknowledgement of the self-defense forces, so that it has not just limitations to defensive capabilities, but to offensive capabilities too. And given the geopolitics and just the long time that Japan has had restrictions placed on its defense of its own territorial integrity, and then what's going on with North Korea and Taiwan, Japan is rather obligated to have the kinds of defense capabilities that means it's not reliant on a foreign power to provide that for them, and therefore potentially be at something of a disadvantage in times of great distress. So that's happening right now, in fact, and the Japanese want to get away from that. So, for example, China and the United States are at loggerheads, and they are applying sanctions against each other as a consequence of not just the Uyghurs and the political dynamics that are going on in China, but also the trade tensions, the COVID debate about Wuhan, and also just the Belt and Road initiatives that are really taking a lot of energy and actually somewhat successfully expanding China's reach. So they have sanctions against the United States, and the United States has sanctions against China too. And Japan is standing in the middle. So there are many Japanese companies. Japan's largest foreign trade partner is China. And these companies that are trading with China are under restrictions by the United States to pursue or observe the sanctions the United States applies on China. And similarly, China expects and anticipates that Chinese companies that are doing business with China also apply Chinese sanctions or observe them against the United States. So Japan is in a particularly difficult situation. It does prevent the prime minister from being a little bit more aggressive where he might want to be. And it also creates this schism between the Abe kind of faction, the Abe group, which is perceived to be a little bit more hawkish with regard to China, and Mr. Kishida and his foreign minister, which is a little bit more dovish, or is perceived to be dovish, and it allows that schism to kind of grow and be embellished by the two speakers of these agendas. So there's plenty to be observed going forward, and it actually comes up even today. We see signs of that when Mr. Abe talks about it, or Mr. Hayashi has a policy speech. You can see it right away. So first of all, let me talk about the supplemental budget, which was passed last year, and it's already kind of old news. We're still in January. The supplemental budget allowed for 100,000 yen to go for every family who had a child under 18. There was a lot of debate back and forth, if you remember that, but eventually Komeito won that particular argument, where the amount of stipend was conveyed in cash and a one-lump payment. There was the initial initiative was half of it would be in cash and half of it would be in vouchers spread out over 6 months. That didn't really compel anybody or really generate much excitement. The Komeito demanded pretty strongly that it be one lump payment and it be in cash. No more vouchers for different things. So this distribution has already happened. It happened late December, early January. And as a consequence of that, there was a little bit of an uptick in the economy. Not everybody has children, but those who had children, some of them, 2 or 3, they did get a little bit of a boost there. The other things that the supplemental budget addressed, and not exclusively, but there was a massive COVID response. You can see that today, that hospitals are gearing up. They've decided to reduce the emphasis on zero tolerance and now just to be accepting COVID and addressing the people who are really sick. You're seeing that today and this last week, that if you have COVID or you think you have the Omicron variant, you talk to the ward office, the hospitals, and they tell you to really stay at home unless you've got bad symptoms. So we're seeing that roll out right now. Medical enhancements on dealing with that, beds, devices, that sort of thing. And the booster rollout have received large attention. And now you're seeing that just in January. February will be much more active as the boosters actually start hitting the prefectures. And also they go beyond just the first responders. So in typical fashion, the first responders, the people who are essential workers, get the first rollout. And probably in February, late February, those will be available to. They'll start with the people who are most in need, those people who are 65 years and older, and then roll out to others. So they've already been distributed, and they're just working on the administration. There also, go-to travel is anticipated to begin probably in March or April. This is more in Maya's area of expertise. We can talk about that a little bit. But go-to travel was or is a way to supplement people traveling in Japan. It's got two components. It's got the domestic component. It's got the international component. So the first stage will be on enhancing and producing more travel among people who live in Japan to travel throughout Japan. And this is expected to roll out, right around Golden Week, just before the upper house election. So all of this, nothing happens in a vacuum. So this is something to look forward to, and I predict that it'll happen right around that time to generate this we feel good about being Japanese among the electorate, so that the LDP can come into more fruitful power, so that the Kishida administration can move forward. The Japanese Diet passes about 60 or 70 laws each year. And from these laws tumble out various regulations of the ministries. They've already kind of gamed that out so that when the ministries produce these laws, that's almost all laws are produced by the ministries. Some laws are independently submitted by various factions. For example, the casino law was a law that was passed in the Diet that was motored almost exclusively by the Hosoda faction, which is now the Abe faction, since Mr. Hosoda became the Speaker of the House of Representatives. This year, they had about 65 bills that they were going to put into consideration to discuss and then potentially pass in the diet to become law. Usually they become law in April of the following year. So we're getting ready to initiate many of the laws that were passed last year at around this time. And this year, the 160-day regular diet will go, and it will end right around the time that the upper house elections start. And so they've reduced the number of bills that they're going to consider this year because they know much energy is going to be spent on the election, and not enough can be devoted to debates and bolstering the administrative vehicle, which is the Japanese government. So we can look forward to many initiatives that will be put up. They will be mostly geared towards COVID, the economy, because the prime minister is really focused on his concept of a new capitalism. He made a policy speech over last week and talked about his ideas without a whole lot of beef and sinew to the bones of what he was talking about. So people are hungry for that. Defense will take on a renewed interest. The United States and Japan, Australia, India. There's a lot of movement going on there, and there's a lot of things that are in play now. We'll talk just a little bit about that. The China policy will absorb a lot of information and energy, as well what's going on with North Korea. Let's talk a little bit about Mr. Kishida's situation. His approval rating, if you follow this briefing every week, was very high. It's taken a bit of a hit last week. He's down, just a tad, a couple of points, 4 points, since the last time they held this survey. They only do it once every 2 months or so. So he's standing right at 55% approval rating of his administration and of his policies. Generally, the reasons are people who were polled said they don't really expect very much from this administration or from Mr. Kishida. And that's probably because he's coming off of a very long Abe administration where Abe, gradually increased his presence and his delivery on TV, his acumen as a leader. For a long time he was there. His cabinet was very stable. And so he grew into this a very reliable, forceful leader. And probably when Mr. Abe started his first term, you could compare him very closely to what Mr. Kishida is going to now. He's much of a unknown quantity at this point, but all indicators are that he will go strong and long. They do not want to have a lower house election before the term of the lower house is up for a lot of different reasons, not just the gerrymandering that was finished and that redistributes some of the electoral votes. So prefectures that had, for example, 3 or 4 members of the lower house have been redistricted, and now they only have 2 or 3 members. And when the election comes in, that really clarifies this distinction between the LDP candidates and the Komeito candidates. But those kinds of things, the Japanese electors, the people who are running this in the LDP and also in Komeito, they don't want this confrontation to come up. So it will come up as the term ends. We do not expect there to be a snap election when the upper house election comes. The other thing that kind of anchored the diminution in Mr. Kishida's approval rating is that he just seems to lack leadership. If you're watching him closely on TV, he doesn't come across very forcefully. He's reacting to situations. He is doing many more briefings. He does seem to be a little bit more affable than certainly Mr. Suga did. But it's just, I think we're going through kind of growing pains. And finally, infections within the country, the COVID and Omicron variant, the 19 prefectures who go into a quasi-lockdown, people have judged that the administration was too slow. 50% of the respondents reported that. And fully 76% of the Japanese population, so it's an extrapolation, but in the survey said that they fear catching Omicron. And since it's so virulent, I think most people understand that they, being as risk averse as Japanese are known to be, the third dose rollout will receive a lot of attention, a lot of press. But I think we're moving towards that era when we begin to live with COVID. A lot will be revealed in the experiment with China, which has zero tolerance. We've got the Olympics that start in 4 days. So that will provide a kind of a barometer for, which strategy is actually the one that is going to work. Also, since our last briefing, the United States has accepted or welcomed its ambassador, Rahm Emanuel, into the position. I don't know, but I imagine since a week has passed, he's already presented his credentials to the emperor. That's one of the first things that these individuals do and should do. But he was on television. He's not too active yet, but we can anticipate that. And probably on his posture, you can anticipate great emphasis on the China pushback and on strengthening the alliance between Japan and the United States, and to nurture particularly the defense alliance. The Japanese Diet passed the budget for defense just before the end of the year, $47 billion US, an 8-year year-to-year increase, 10% from last year. So that's pretty big. And that tells you that, this area is going to receive much more emphasis. And this money is not just, earmarked for, the nuclear umbrella and the protection that is provided by the United States, but also increasing capacities and capabilities within Japan itself. So 10% is a big amount of money. It doesn't mean that that is going to Okinawa or to the bases that are, manned by the United States military, either Air Force or Navy Marines. But developing actually strike capabilities here in Japan. That's not actually under the terms of understanding and interpretation of the Constitution allowed. You can only have defense capabilities. There is some capacity for dual use, but even in those situations, it undergoes scrutiny. So that underpins one of the reasons why it's so vitally important to revise the Constitution, to acknowledge that the self-defense forces is not a defense force exclusively, that they would probably rename the self-defense forces, and they would do much more for the Ministry of Defense, which is run by Mr. Kishi, which is, as everybody knows, the brother of Mr. Abe, the former prime minister. So a lot is going on there. Over the week, last weekend on Sunday, there was elections in Okinawa for Nago. Nago is the site where Henoko is. Henoko is the peninsula where the United States Corps of Engineers is expanding that peninsula to accommodate a marine facility, to close the largest marine facility in Japan, in Futenma, which the city of Futenma has grown around, and now it's actually a highly populated place. I grew up in Okinawa. I knew that area well, had lots of friends that lived there. And even at that point in time, maybe 30, 40, maybe 50 years ago, gosh, there were a lot of neighborhoods around that area, and there's a lot of training, there's a lot of helicopters, there's a lot of marine exercises that go on there. They want to move that lock, stock, and barrel from Futenma to Henoko, and as a component of that, to move many of the facilities and the capabilities to Guam. And a lot of that has already occurred, but this is a larger program to reduce the tensions in Okinawa so that Okinawans accept, the burden that the United States presence places on them. That's been one of the bones of contention, and that's one of the campaign issues in Nago. Unfortunately, for those people who are opposing the base, the current mayor of Nago won a re-election, and he's been somewhat unenthusiastic about debating the move and the, if you're opposed to the base, it's the degradation of the environment and the dumping of the land into the sea and creating all of this. I mean, Okinawa has been a hotbed of this tension between not only the United States presence in Japan, but also, the Okinawan desire for more autonomy and independence from Tokyo. And Tokyo really does pretty much overlord what's going on in Okinawa. And in fact, in a layup to the Nago elections, announced that they would be withholding economic development funds because of the governor of Okinawa's reluctance to really embrace this move from Futenma to Henoko. So please keep a watch on Okinawa. It will become more and more an issue as we roll out to the year. The governor's re-election is in August, so that will be another thing that Tokyo forces will want to have somebody that is more accommodating to the LDP's version of how the U.S.-Japan relationship should mature. So there will be a lot of controversy going on there. Similarly, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, these two issues dominate foreign policy in Japan. The United States and the leader of the United States and Japan had a discussion Friday of last week, not 3 days ago, but 10 days ago. They were scheduled to talk for 10 minutes. It went for 80 minutes. It was originally planned to be in face. It was going to be the first meeting between Joe Biden and Mr. Kishida, but because of the strain of the Omicron variant and just the travel restrictions and maybe the age of Mr. Biden, I don't know, they decided it was not a good idea. Let's do it virtually instead. I guess if they did it virtually, it would have included much more fanfare, a state visit, and that sort of thing. So as a consequence, the 1 hour scheduled meeting went, a whole 20 minutes over. So I think there's probably something to be thankful for. Plenty of time to talk about the main issues and the defense capabilities and the sharing of information. So a lot of that discussion. And one of the points of discussion, you might have remembered that the 2+2, the dialogue between the Secretary of State and the Minister of Defense, it started, I think, with a meeting in Alaska with China, and then the United States and Japan did it, and then Japan and Australia did it. It seems that combination resonated very well. So they're going to be doing much more of that, and in fact, probably including some other individuals as well, perhaps a Minister of Commerce and the METI minister in these kinds of dialogues. So this is building diplomatically. This is a form and a format. It is not official yet, but I think that it's going in that direction, that they found that these meetings really began to generate somewhat immediate results. And with the geopolitical landscape changing so quickly with what's going on in Ukraine, it's on a daily basis it's happening. The report with on Friday with Mr. Biden talking with the president of Ukraine and the discrepancies of their views of what's going on there. I mean, this is very, very tense. But the Olympics are in 4 days, and so it's somewhat unlikely that Russia would make an incursion and generate that kind of controversy during a time when China really wants to showcase its capabilities and its economy and its reaction to COVID. So I think there's room to be optimistic, but the United States certainly is a little bit more nervous about the situation than even the Ukrainians. So plenty to see there. Once again, touching on COVID, the booster shots are being implemented now. The Japanese have purchased probably 18 million vials that are being distributed for first responders and essential workers. They've got that pretty well oiled and ready to go. They've done that with the first shot and then the second shot that were administered. And so I think the Japanese are moving to a regular standard way of dealing with this. And because of the emphasis on enhancing medical care and medical supplies, medical facilities, dealing with those people who are severely sick, they'll get the medical attention. And people who, with COVID, sometimes you get it and you really don't know that you've had it. You might be, a headache or somewhat ill for a day or two, and then it just passes. And then finally, the analysis of most experts is that not just herd immunity, but just the fact that since COVID, or since Omicron is so virulent, that almost everybody will have caught it at some point in time, and therefore develop the immunities for that. I think we're moving very quickly to a time when it is just treated like an influenza or a kind of cold. The economy is falling as COVID continues, so the Japanese government wants to get back on track. Per capita productivity is scheduled to fall behind South Korea and Taiwan in about 2 or 3 years' time. So that has generated a lot of concern. One of the things that motivates workers to be more productive is their salary and their outlook for the future. So that's one of the reasons why Mr. Kishida is promoting this new capitalism that he talks about. He's talked about it ever since he was running for prime minister. The definition of what this means is less clear because people really don't kind of understand. But I think clearly what it means to Mr. Kishida is that, number one, wages need to increase. And number two, the accumulation of wealth of the big companies, the corporates, and wealthy individuals needs to be not so robust and redistributed, particularly to the lower class, but also to enhance the middle class as well. This is his idea for developing a new economy, or to get the economy going. He calls it a new capitalism. It's somewhat scary to think about that, because it's like with Mr. Abe and the three arrows. They have discovered and kind of pretty much resolved right now that the reason why the economy was running so well under the Abe administration, under his Abenomics, was because the books were cooked. So that has come out in diet hearings this last week. Heads have rolled. People have received punishment, diminution in their salaries, and actually been removed from their positions, because the books were actually cooked to show that the economy was expanding far greater than it actually was. People don't do this in a vacuum. They do this because they're trying to enhance their careers, or because of orders from on high. That conversation, and usually those kind of inquiries, die before they really get to the bottom of things. For example, with the suicide of the Ministry of Finance individual during the Osaka school scandal. It's kind of one of those things in Japanese politics that happens on too much of a regular basis, where finally, when the suspicions really come up, it never reaches a full resolution. And in order to understand what's going on, all you have to rely on are what the reporting from Bunshin, which is not an official source. It's kind of like a scandal magazine, but it does produce and report on those kinds of things that can't be resolved in an official capacity. So getting back to Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, speaking of things that sometimes cannot be resolved in an official capacity, one of the things that he has high on his agenda is to work on the release of Jack Kelly, who was the general counsel of Nissan, with Mr. Carlos Ghosn. So he's been in detention since then. His trial has been ongoing, and he is all the ambassador has stated publicly that this is one of his hot buttons to release a U.S. citizen from this kind of what they call hostage justice here in Japan. So you can take a look at that happening pretty quickly, I think within the next 2 months or so. The other thing that we can look forward to, I think in pretty quick order, Maya might have insight on this, or maybe even different views, but is on the relaxation of foreign entry requirements. Teachers, researchers, and students have suffered incredibly as a consequence of that. I mean, their careers are put on hold, their jobs, their commitments to come to Japan to study or to teach. They've suffered a lot from that. Also, the commercial visitors, people whose companies are here, that maybe they've been assigned here, or maybe it's time for them to rotate back. They suffer as a consequence of that. Sometimes their terms of duty here, typically for the Americans, it's 3 or 4 years. With the Europeans, it's a longer time frame. But when you signed up for 3 years here because you were 2 years in Singapore and 3 years in Japan, and your next is going to be maybe at the headquarters with a promotion, you're really looking forward to that. And now you've got to hold the fort because you can't get your replacement, and it really does hurt things. In Hong Kong, the restrictions are so tough that people are actually fleeing there. There was some discussion, because a lot of that is the financial community, that Tokyo would become potentially an attractive alternative to absorb that. But I think Japan is not ready for that. I think it's going to take a couple of years before, first of all, there is the national commitment to that foreigners being more prominent in industry and commerce here in the capital city. I don't think that there's much of an appetite for that. There are other issues that I think are more prominent. So I think Singapore probably will continue to be, the main market for capital exchange for the foreseeable future. But in any event, tourists, students, and commercial visitors, I think we can look forward to, first of all, the first wave of teachers, researchers, and students. Generally, the school in the fiscal year starts in April. I think that's too soon for researchers and teachers, students to be coming in. So there's going to be a little bit of a lag there. But I certainly believe that, come June or July, you'll see much more of a relaxation there. And the commercial visitors as a result. It will be a little bit longer before the tourists come in, but I don't think, we learned a lot, the Japanese learned a lot from having all of the tourists coming in before COVID and the tremendous influx of tourists to Kyoto, especially from Southeast Asia, Malaysia, and China were pretty prominent. I don't think we're going to see that, and I think what the Japanese have learned is that these attractions for Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto need to be redistributed throughout the entire country. There are marvelous places to visit, and I think they're going to be guiding people in those directions and not so much to the hot spots. The protests for the Japanese treatment of restrictions has really reached a pitch. Mongolia, Poland, India, and Malaysia have already had protests in front of the Japanese embassies, and more are planned. Germany, Austria, Spain, and Argentina are planned for protests in front of the Japanese embassy. So it's a pretty serious thing going on. Next week, we start February. There will be a huge protest in front of the Prime Minister's residence in February. So there is a lot to look forward there. I think we'll be seeing some movement on the entry bans falling, but not quite right away. And maybe after we close this briefing and go into the questions and answers, Maya can elaborate a little bit more on that. I'm trying to close up because I've been going on a little bit long here. Defense and constitutional reform. The United States and Japan are working very closely together. First strike capabilities are something that the Japanese want, particularly in light of what's going on with North Korea. You might have noticed that North Korea fired 2 more rockets just this last week. We are in the first week, the first month of this year, and already they've fired 4 missiles, 1 of them hypersonic and 2 of them cruise missiles. The 4th one was a land-based, rail-based launch. And what we're seeing is that the voluntary restraint that the North Koreans have practiced over the last 2.5 years is beginning to fade away. The United States was somewhat adamant about restrictions and sanctions imposed on North Korea should they begin to pursue that. And so as a consequence, they're starting to ratchet it up and launch more because they want the United States to have a better dialogue and a more consistent policy with regard to North Korea. North Korea is still suffering deeply from COVID and from their economy, but they're still, ratcheting up on their saber rattling. And that makes the United States, and particularly the Japanese, very, very nervous. So first strike capabilities, it only takes less than 4 minutes for some of these vehicles to potentially strike the Japanese soil. And that is, by all interpretations, the goal of these capabilities by North Korea. So Japan does have a reason to be cautious and potentially first strike in a time of tension. I mean, for example, if Ukraine became a hotbed and then Taiwan becomes a hotbed, it is likely that North Korea could become a hotbed at the same time. That would be really bad news. So enhanced U.S.-Japan alliance capabilities and Japan's bolstering of the southern and the northern defenses, because it's not just China that's involved in this. It is also Russia. The signing of the peace treaty, it still escapes us, and it doesn't mean that we are in a state of war or a state of conflict, but it does mean that we haven't signed a peace treaty with that nation yet. And so when the dual armada from Japan and Russia sailed through the straits about 3 months ago, it does cause one to be very concerned about that sort of thing. The Prime Minister has announced that he wants to refine a new national defense program this year. So there's a lot of emphasis on that. That's one of the items that will occupy the new U.S. ambassador's agenda here as well. So there's a lot of energy going there. And we talked a lot last year during the Suga administration about the launch of the new digital agency. It's one of the high points of his career. He started it and launched it, within 3 months of becoming prime minister. As an offside, Mr. Suga continues to grow in influence and quiet power. He doesn't have a faction. It is possible that he could start a faction, but I think in hindsight, there are some things that he did during his administration that were very effective. And he does have a certain cadre of people and a certain position on issues that does attract some members of the LDP. So he is an LDP member. He's just an independent member without a faction, but he does have continual sway. particularly with regard to digitization. He was minister of the communications ministry, so he has a lot of pull there. And you might remember that when he became prime minister, one of the first things he did was he forced the telephone carriers to reduce their prices. And they did that in lockstep. He didn't require much more than just telling them that that's what he wanted them to do as prime minister. It's something that he knows a lot about. And that really affected the economy too. It brought down the the inflation rate, and it did affect. I mean, telephone rates coming down had a huge impact. So moving forward, we understand the digital agency. It does take time. It's not going to be. I mean, it was initially focused on the MyCard system, eliminating fax, eliminating Hunko, and somehow integrating biometrics into the MyCard system, and also bolstering, the proliferation of MyCard. And I think that they're focused right now on just this integration and consolidation within the various ministries of technologically integrating them so that they're all on the same page. They're all using the same kind of format, the same email, the same encryption, that sort of thing. And much of that resolves around cybersecurity. I think most people who are in the industry understand that you can do a lot with healthcare, you can do a lot with digitization of the economy, but without cybersecurity, all of that is meaningless. So there is a lot of energy going into that, and cybersecurity means encryption. It means many things dealing with, for example, blockchain and confidentiality and transmission of information. It also means the information that is generated in Japan stays in Japan. So many companies, Facebook, YouTube, Microsoft, they consolidate the information in the headquarters in their capital, where their headquarters is located, and there are some restrictions that are being pursued on that, so that kind of analysis and amalgamation of big data is not done outside; it's done inside Japan, and that information remains part of the Japanese intellectual property. So it's a huge deal. It's a big deal to integrate all of this, and I think that's what's generating a lot of the energy within the digital agency. It's still moving along, and I think we can expect to see some really marvelous things, but it's going to take a little bit of time because there's a sequence that they need to follow. We could be looking forward to some rollouts and some new technologies coming out in terms of business continuity and healthcare proliferation, but privacy concerns, I think, will be paramount. So it's working its way through the system. I will continue to report on that because the digital agency is one of the areas that I'm particularly focused on, and cybersecurity is one of the areas that we focus on as a company. So I think with that, I'd like to close up today's briefing. I've gone on a little bit long. I'd like to open it up, Maya, for questions and answers, and hopefully we can pack this audience so that you're not the only one that's asking questions. Thank you, Maya.
In regards with the GoTo campaign and the border openings. So as you mentioned, the first foreigners, non-permanent residents to be allowed to enter Japan for work will be the academics, teachers, and people who do research with Japanese universities. But at the moment, actually, the Keidanren, the Japan Business Federation, is lobbying very heavily for the allowance of other business related people to enter Japan. So because it turns out that the agricultural sector, also construction sector, and the IT sector, they have really great shortages of labor. And Keidanren is aware of that, so they're trying to lobby the government so that the government gets the borders open sooner than later. We don't know when that will happen. As you said, it will be just first the teachers and the academics, then it will be probably the business people who will be allowed to enter the country for work. And at the end of the day, it will be, the borders will be open for travel and tourism, for leisure. An interesting fact is that, as you said in the beginning, before the pandemic, there was concentration of foreign visitors to Japan, mostly in 2 or 3 areas. They were Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto. At that point, it was, I think, about 5 years ago, the Japanese government actually set a target number of visitors, 60 million visitors to Japan by the year 2030. So, and that number, of course, it doesn't include only the visitors to Japan, inbound travelers. It included, at that point of time, the 20 million Japanese who would go overseas for leisure. So it was accumulated number. And then the interesting thing is that the government has not revised that goal. So still, it is there, it is on the table. So obviously,
That's amazing.
it is amazing, yes. So 60 million travelers. So it's obviously exchange travelers by the year 2030. But as you said, the JNTO, that's the Japan National Tourism Organization, it has been working actually on different strategies to disperse those travelers throughout the country. We don't know how well those strategies will work at this point of time, but they have been learning definitely. So we'll see what happens once the pandemic is over and the borders are open. Of course, we have that's the World Expo in Osaka. Was it in Osaka in 2025? So that's definitely one step towards achieving the goal of 60 million exchange travelers in 2030. And at this point of time, it doesn't look like the goal will be revised, at least in the next 1 or 2 years. But we'll see. Okay, and also I have one more, just a question in my head. You can answer it, or you can
Oh
just
gosh.
say, "Yeah, oh gosh," and forget about it. But we know that once again, I'm going back to energy. The energy sector. That the world, well, especially the developed countries, are talking a lot about green energy and doing away with fossil fuels and going, actually developing renewables. And we also know that a lot of maybe not a lot, but several developed countries have already realized that relying only on renewable energy sources is um,
Not the way to go.
exactly not the way to go. So they have signed agreements to develop the next generation nuclear uh, reactors. At the
Right.
same time, we have two former prime ministers of Japan, Koizumi and Kan, lobbying against this. So I wonder what the dynamics are there and how much weight that lobbying carries in Japan and out of Japan.
I think there's a lot of things to unpack there. Let me talk just a little bit about your first issue about tourists and visas and opening the borders, that sort of thing. There's another segment of the population that received a lot of attention during diet hearings this last week, and I just want to touch upon that, and that is the foreign workers who have been invited to Japan, trainees and that sort of thing. There are two issues that came up that received a lot of attention. One was the broomsticking of the Vietnamese worker. That was actually an incident, or the video was uploaded maybe 2 years ago, and it's only now beginning to get any attention. And the other one was the Sri Lankan girl who died in detention after overstaying her visa. So these two distinct populations, the Japanese are well known to be very, very reluctant for amnesty and for refugee, but very liberal with foreign trainees. And this incident with the abuse of a Vietnamese trainee really shocked the sensibilities as it should. And so that's getting attention at the highest levels, and also the detention. The detention center is actually not getting as much attention as one would think. People haven't lost their jobs or suffered as a consequence of that, and it's an issue that really it's a bone of contention between Japan and many of the countries, because if you overstay your visa and you're in a COVID lockdown, it's difficult for you to get out of Japan and get out of detention. And many people just are languishing there. So it requires a little bit more attention. And I think we'll see a little bit of that as COVID begins to reduce its impact. But there are lots of people who want to come to Japan under the foreign worker visa to get experience and to come to Japan. I mean, Japan has a huge attraction, not just for tourists, but since it's perceived as an advanced technological state, you can come here and pull potatoes out of the ground because it's an advanced. What difference does that make? But still, it's a job. So moving on to your other issue, which is about renewables, I think people understand that Japan has a very aggressive goal. 2040, we will be neutral in carbon production is very aggressive. They can't do that. They're realizing they can't really do that with reliance on renewables. They cannot diminish too much their reliance on coal-fired, and certainly with nuclear producing about 18% of the entire energy component of Japan, they can't wean themselves from nuclear. So most of the technology will be focused on the technology for renewables, it really comes from foreign sources. The Japanese are not as advanced or up to speed on renewables as the Dutch, the Netherlands, people from the Scandinavian countries have great technology. The Americans, the Germans have made great advances there. The problem is that the cost of production have increased enormously. So the way that the Japanese attract these investors is by a guaranteed rate for the amount of energy that they produce. The government will purchase that at a certain rate. But these rate discussions, they were very favorable when the solar panels first came out about 8 years ago. And the rates were very generous. And so you saw a lot of production of solar panels. And that is becoming a little bit less attractive. And the newest one are wave technology, sea-based and land-based wind technology, and to a lesser degree, geothermal. But the nuclear really is, I think, by all extensive analysis, really the way to go. It has no carbon footprint. It just produces a poisonous byproduct of spent fuel. So the technology emphasis there is on what to do with the spent fuel, and most of the result here is just on storage. Bury it deeper. There's no way to kind of make it into something that's a little bit nicer. With coal, you can do scrubbing of the stacks where the effluent is coming out, and cleaning the carbon from that as it is being produced. With nuclear, it is a little bit more difficult. The Japanese signed an agreement just this last week on a fast breeder reactor with the United States. So that's one of the things that the president talked about with Mr. Kishida 2 weeks ago on their phone call, is higher and more advanced cooperation on nuclear energy production. So they've signed a joint venture. The United States and Japan will co-develop a sodium-cooled reactor in, I think, Wyoming. So this is a pretty big deal, and it is based on the technology that the Japanese developed with their sodium-cooled reactor, which is pretty much being shut down. It's not as effective it's run its course, but they do have the technology. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries ran that. So there is cooperation going on there, and I think the area for greatest improvement will be in nuclear, smaller, more efficient nuclear reactors, and the non-renewable or the renewables. I think we will just continue a pace there. I don't know unless we have a leap in some sort of technical breakthrough that's going to be able to consistently produce the shortfall of what the Japanese need to reach carbon neutrality.
So Evan, good morning and thank you for coming up.
Good morning, Evan. How are you doing?
Oh, very good. Enjoying the session as usual. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see you.
This is really a question more to the audience. I'm very interested in the topic of solar power in Japan and wondered if we have any solar specialists in the audience today. Specifically, I'm curious what the status of the Japanese solar industry is. And this is quite topical for me personally because I'm currently building a new house and planning to build it to be 100% electric with a solar panel and battery installation. But was just told last week that we're too close to the ocean. So there's corrosion concerns about the first system we were thinking of going with. So I need to do more research. And I would like to try and use a local Japanese solution if I can. Until now, most of the panels and the batteries that I've been looking at are actually produced outside of Japan, either in China.
Yeah.
Or even in Canada, actually. My native Canada has a good manufacturer of solar panels. But I'm just curious why Japan is behind in what seems like an industry where they should be able to excel.
That's a great idea. And one of the other things that Maya and I have talked about is that it would be nice to have other people in the audience who are experts, not just in what you've asked about solar panels and generation of solar here in Japan. I think we probably have some experts here in the room, but we should appeal to these kinds of experts to always come up. But it's also, for example, the third generation of the web. Maya's talked about that a couple of times about this emerging. It's inevitable that it's happening. I don't have that much expertise in it, but I'm sure in the audience there's somebody that's actually dealing with that. And also, beyond 5G is another great topic of conversation. doesn't have so much to do with Japanese politics at this point in time. It will, but I think with regard to solar generation, it does have lots of policy implications.
To make sure that it is on point for the politics discussion, one point I had meant to mention is that there has been a subsidy for residential solar panel installations provided by the Japanese government. That will actually be ending this March. And they're shifting focus from the solar panels to the battery installations because apparently they feel that residential solar panel installations have achieved a point of critical mass, and now it's more the nighttime battery storage that should be the focus.
Yep. How about that? And the problem with that particular issue is that a lot of the battery production is based on production inputs that are dominated by China. So that's another issue.
Yes, indeed. And it looks like most of the solar panels which were imported for residential use here in Japan, they have reached the end of their lifespan and they're now due for recycling, which is actually quite a big issue as well. And as long as I know, so the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, which actually created and, advanced that policy, of increasing the number of solar panels used by private residences, let's say by individuals here in Japan. So they created the policy, maybe started 30 years ago. And now they are trying actually to implement, the last stage of it and recycle those solar panels that have already been retired. The problem, though, is that with the new goals, energy goals, and net zero carbon emissions, so it seems like an impossible goal to do because the recycling of the solar panels actually creates CO2. And so this is a conundrum which they're trying to solve, I believe. And probably the next step, as you said, Evan, now is, to move to batteries. But thinking in the long term, I just wonder, how good that, that next stage will be in 15 or 20 or 30 years. This is just a thought. Anyway, I'm sorry, I cannot help you with this at the moment. I invite anybody, if there is a person who knows more about these policies here in Japan, if there is somebody in the audience, please join us here. Yes, and Rich, thank you for coming up.
Good morning, Rich. Great room last week. Thank you very much, talking about autonomous driving.
Thank you, Maya and Tim. And although I'm fascinated by the energy discussion and have personal interest in it, I certainly don't have any expertise except to kind of spin off of what Tim said about the inputs. Lithium, the rare earth type stuff is there are difficulties in the supply chain for sure, and there are also post-production issues with lithium-ion batteries. When they burn, it's a real challenge to deal with, a product safety challenge. So, yeah, I think that's something I don't know much about. I had actually hoped to ask a question of Tim regarding the new capitalism, but I don't want to derail the kind of energy discussion.
No, go ahead.
Is that okay? All right, great, thank you. So, yeah, you mentioned early on in your presentation, which was great, by the way, very super informative and very concise.
Thank you.
But the new capitalism business, and it kind of made me think about a term I had honestly been completely unaware of. I think it was Mitch Ketchum or something, another guy on LinkedIn that I heard refer to it, collective capitalism, which is a term that you guys probably know about it, but I didn't. It was a Japanese form of capitalism, and it kind of reminds me of the way capitalism used to be in the United States, kind of pre-Milton Friedman a little bit, not to get too deep into the economic weeds, but and I'm wondering if that's kind of what they're talking about. It sounds a little bit like it, or it also sounded, the way you described your interpretation of PM Kishida's intentions remind me a little bit about what we've been hearing from Shu Kimpei about, what do they call it, collective prosperity kind of thing, distribute the wealth around a little bit. What do you think they mean by new capitalism? What do you think is it something new really, or is it kind of a harkening back to the old ways, or what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure, and I don't think anybody else is either. The Prime Minister was peppered with questions to elaborate a little bit more about what he meant. And I think what we can at least tell right now is his idea. Could you please mute yourself while not talking? There we go, Rich. I enjoy listening to your squeaky chair, but The new capitalism, sorry, at least it means companies who are employing people, you need to pay people more. You're hoarding the cash. People already understand that about Japanese companies, and through the Abe administration, there is no trickle down here. The companies are so risk averse that when they are making money, they will hoard it. They will increase the amount of holdings. They might purchase assets with it, but they're not going to distribute it to the workers, because that's kind of the road you can't back away from unless inflation begins to eat away at that. So they've lost control of that, and I think the Japanese employers want to have as much ability to manage their resources as possible, and that includes not just the profits that they generate, but also the people that work for them as a human resource. So I think in essence, what it means is those companies need to relinquish a little bit more of their take-home profits rather than storehousing them for a rainy day. They've been doing that long enough, and I think the Prime Minister is saying, rejigger it so that you're distributing more, not just to your executives in terms of higher salaries or brand new cars every year, or expense accounts. Distribute them to the laborers. And the second thing that it means is to embellish and pack more wealth into the middle class, which has been shrinking, and to the lower class, which has been shrinking, particularly with regard to social services for children who are living under the poverty level. So they will receive a lot more attention there. It appears that, Mr. Kishida has I don't know how to describe it, a more caring heart, more of a Komeito leaning inflection. Although, politically, when you look at it, there is a little bit of a beef between the Kishida administration and Komeito. It's not as warm and fuzzy as it was with Mr. Suga and Mr. Nikai. There were a couple of fights this last week about the Hyogo elections, and the LDP promoting Komeito candidates in this next election that's coming up for the upper house. And there was some tough words thrown back and forth. The LDP backed down. Mr. Kishida is the president of the LDP, so he backed down on that, and Komeito kind of won that war. But it did show that there's a little bit of love lost between the two of them. So it's another fighting point. But I think what he wants to do is enhance a more, what he says, equitable distribution of wealth. So that, in any interpretation, you've got to imagine he's talking about not so much the wealthy individuals as you might talk about in the United States, but the wealthy companies, because the companies here, the Japanese economy is run by those massive companies, those conglomerates that really dominate the economy, even though they're small in number. And the proof will be in the pudding. We are gearing up to the Shunto offensive, which will be in March, later February. The discussion started this last week between the Keidanren component of the Keidanren Trade Federation and the Union of Associated Trade Unions, Lengo, on their discussions for enhancing wages. The discussions seem to be centered around something that doesn't appear to be too attractive. A 4% increase in wages is the demand from the trade unions. Mr. Kishida is suggesting somewhere in that neighborhood, 3%. And so they'll probably reach that with threats of non-compliance to be, higher taxes to those companies who don't comply. So I don't know if that really responds too much to it, Rich, but I think the definition of what this new capitalism is will be based on those kind of concepts. And it just takes a little bit more time for more clever news correspondents to pursue those questions and get the Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Trade and Industry to actually elaborate a little bit more on what it actually means.
Thank you. That's perfect.
And we've got also Hiroaki. Good morning, Hiroaki.
Actually, I have lots of questions, but I would like to just go back to the debate on the solar panel issues, renewable energy first.
Excellent.
May I? Good. I checked some information through the Google research. So Japanese solar panels, large of them are made in China, right?
Yes.
Maybe. So then Maya also mentioned that now Japanese solar panel infrastructure is in the time of changing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I also saw this a YouTube channel of the former Prime Ministers Koizumi and Kan's press meeting.
Yes.
So then, of course, they are talking about solar panel as well. So yes, of course, maybe Japan could import solar panel maybe for that. I saw this kind of idea. I mean, during you guys' discussion. But on the same time, I also know that, like, of course, solar panel, some of Chinese company allegedly use some forced labor kind of power to make solar panels, right? Then some of the Chinese company are sanctioned by U.S. I mean, executive order or something.
Right.
Maybe. Yeah. So, but I saw some news like some UNHCR, I mean, representative may visit like Xinjiang province to investigate the human rights, I mean, issues, especially on perhaps this kind of forced labor issues. It would be good maybe if the situation resolved, especially like a concern of human rights concern somehow resolved by that visit by UN officials, then maybe Japan could discuss about some sort of, I mean, cooperation on solar panel for enhancing, of course, our sustainable energy supply for, of course. But I'm not sure. Just my comments.
Yes, there is, yes, that problem with the forced labor. There is also the problem with environmental, well, what's that? Environmental issues.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yes, and there is so much going on. I mean, challenges with the production of solar panels that, well, obviously the solution is not going to or to be found soon, I believe. And I guess that's why quite a few countries are actually moving forward, and they're trying to find other solutions to replace the solar panels. And of course, the solar panels, they cannot provide a stable, that stable stream of energy, which is necessary to maintain the, let's say, the industries here, because the solar panels can be very good solutions for individual houses and, people who want to use the solar energy to, let's say, for their residences, but at the same time, that stable stream of energy, which is necessary for industries, especially heavy industries, like automotive industry, like chemical industry, and so on, it's not there. It's not going to
True.
provide a solution. So yes, of course, it will be good, if the forced labor issues are resolved. The question is, how do we move after that forward? But yes, I believe it's a difficult question to answer.
No, yeah,
So,
thank you. Just a discussion, perhaps, at this
yes.
stage. Of course, like after the Fukushima nuclear accident, of course, Japan stopped the nuclear reactors. It's, of course, I mean, cause, of course, CO2 emission, massive amount of CO2 emissions, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, if of course, I'm wondering about SMR, promotion, of course, as one of the solution for it. I mean, this
Yes.
Japanese future cost of energy. Yeah.
Well,
matter, yes.
Yes. Hopefully, we can get some information later on and talk about this in the future rooms. So I also noticed that you had other questions, a couple of other questions.
Oh yes, to the Timothy actually.
Yes.
Yes. I saw a Twitter of the expert, security policy expert, I guess, Japanese security policy expert, saying that like approval of the final draft of NSS, NDS, or NPR by the President Biden will be delayed for a few more weeks due to ongoing Ukraine crisis. I'm wondering, is this correct or not? Or if you know this is correct or not, I highly appreciate. And also, if you could provide some possible implication or impact of this delay in this U.S. side security formulation of security policy in the U.S. To this Japanese, defense diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, Ukraine crisis also linked with it. That is why I would like to know how Japanese stance or action to this, Ukraine crisis, see or understood by in the U.S. side also. Then, sorry, they ask another questions. Of course, Japanese examining the option for the future defense capability, including strike capabilities. But I'm just wondering about this another, option like alternative, like came up recently, like developing the new missile defense capability, employing the laser or railgun. The Japanese prioritize railgun type missile defense system. Then laser system could be developed in the US side. So I'm proposing interoperable one, which have a capability of neutralizing the hypersonic missile capabilities and also cost-effective one. So I know that this issue is very much, discussed in the TV show, especially like which the Congressman Onodera actually deliver some insight. So that what I talk about this railgun nuclear missile defense capability is actually provided by him, Congressman Onodera. So I'm wondering that how this kind of options is discussed within this circle, especially defense circle in Japan, also in the US circle as well. So also wondering, I also suggesting that like Congressman Onodera could, come up in this parliamentary session for examining this alternative in detail with this distinguished security defense parliamentarian in the session by committee as well. Thank you. If Timothy knows some detail or insight, I highly appreciate on that.
Thank you, Hiroaki. Right off the bat, I just have to give you an acknowledgement. You have just now surpassed Maya's ability to ask a multi-leveled, highly complex question, which I really am struggling to address.
Okay.
You know, Onodera Sensei was he did join our clubhouse room a couple of times. He is a friend. He's he's a great debater, a good English speaker. And maybe we can get him to come back in the room. I know he's extremely busy, but he did, he honored us by coming on a couple of times and actually coming up to the speakers platform a couple of times. And also Rich, thank you very much. Rich said he's going to contribute to the Japanese economy by purchasing a chair today. So thank you very much for that, Rich. With regard to defense capabilities, we don't have, I don't know if we have a defense expert here. I've toyed with embellishing more on defense here on this room. You will, defense is going to become a bigger and bigger topic of conversation politically, diplomatically. The new ambassador from the United States is going to be focused on that particular component. The U.S.-Japan alliance will receive renewed attention. It's already received, more money than it had in history. And this issue on strike capabilities and offensive capacity, I think, just to go a little bit into your question, I think yes, the advances in technology will, like the railgun, that sort of thing. But I think the Japanese and the Americans are moving more quickly beyond that in realms that we don't know about publicly. It's not being discussed. It's not being revealed too much. But I think it'll be more space-based than land-based. And I think it'll be more on an alliance basis, not dominated exclusively by Japan. But there are tremendous efforts going on there. Under President Trump, he launched the space defense, a new arm. It actually didn't go into the law to enhance, the Army, Navy, Marines, and the National Guard. But it is something that has great appeal, and they are accepting recruits in the United States and Japan and in other countries for the space agency. So I think there is a lot going on there that doesn't really receive the scrutiny that maybe it deserves. But I think in the coming months, that will be one of the solutions that will be pursued. There's too much attention. There's too much advanced technology that can be brought to bear on it. So I think a lot of it is just not very much talked about. But yes, we should get somebody in the room who can come up on stage who is very familiar with defense capabilities. You might, just as an aside, notice that the president of the American Chamber of Commerce, newly elected, taking office in January, is in the defense community with one of the defense, the United States defense companies. And that's, I don't think it's a signal. I think it's just an interesting coincidence. But being as a leader of the business community, defense and cybersecurity will take prominence in many of the initiatives that are pursued. And I think as a consequence, the United States Chamber, the Chamber of Commerce in Japan will also have a fuller and more rewarding, enriching experience with the United States Embassy, because the interests are so cohesive, not just on business, but also on defense and that sort of thing. So plenty more to discuss there. But I'm sorry, it's not really richly textured to the several questions that you asked, Hiroaki.
Thank you, Timothy. Appreciate.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maya.
Have a great day, everybody, and we're looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
This was Japan Expert Insights Room on Japanese politics. Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next Sunday at 8:30 in the morning, Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and enjoy every day as much as possible. See you.